Okay, well, I want to go ahead and start and say welcome. My name is Carmen Samuel. I'm with the Community Engagement Department here at the New Jersey Performing Arts Center. And we have partnered with the Newark History Society to present these panel discussions about the different facets of Newark's history. And we are excited about this partnership. We're so glad that you all are here. We're glad that Mr. Tim Chris continues to work with us to bring these to the community. And we are also extremely excited that this is the second event this year. The third one and the final one for this particular season will be in March, so keep an eye out for that. And lastly but not least, before I introduce Mr. Tim Chris, we want to make sure that you guys are aware of the jazz festival that we have happening starting next month. There's plenty of pamphlets outside, so take a look. We've got a lot of things happening this season, so feel free to come back in addition to the panel discussions because we'd love to see you guys in the audience. And so without further ado, please welcome the founder and the president of the Newark History Society, Mr. Tim Chris.
Thanks, Carmen, and I'll immediately say co-founder Warren Grover is over there, and we always clap for Warren. It's so good to see you tonight. This is the sixth in our series of programs related to the 350th anniversary of Newark. But perhaps the 70th program. I'm going to have to go back, Warren, and count them all up. This is our 14th year of putting on programs through the Newark History Society. Our goal originally was to draw attention to Newark's absolutely remarkable and fascinating history, spanning 350 years. As Gail Malmgren, who runs our Newark Archives project, will tell you, anything important practically that happened in the United States has a Newark connection. The more you dig, but also to encourage research and engagement with Newark's history, and we're excited that so much is going on in that area as well. There are a number of programs coming up. I don't know, 14 years ago when we started this, there wasn't much happening in Newark. Now there is so much happening with conflicts all over the place for the same evening. But a lot is happening. Let me mention a few of them. One, John Schreiber stopped in just to make sure to remind me about November 2nd. I know I want to go. Our dear friend Vic Parsonet is going to have a four-hand piano concert and conversation with the great pianist Seymour Bernstein, who grew up in Newark and had a most esteemed career. The following night, the Newark History Society is co-sponsoring a book signing, a discussion by Linda Forgosh, at the Newark Public Library on her new biography of Louis Bamberger. Any of us with any time in Newark remember Bamberger's department store. Her book was recently published by Brandeis University Press, and Walt Chambers has been campaigning for years for a program on Newark's retailing experience. This is not that, Walt, but it's a step. It's a step in the right direction. That's a good goal. Guy Sterling handed me. He's been doing monthly these terrific conversations at the library, and the one that's coming up next month is on Newark's gospel music tradition. And he's recruited the Reverend Stephanie Minity and Dr. Albert Lewis Jr. to on November 15th at the library to be in conversation about that tradition here in Newark. Then next March, Linda Caldwell Epps, who will be speaking tonight, will be giving a program on the suffragette movement in Newark, kind of in anticipation of the 100th anniversary of women gaining the right to vote, if we can believe that it took that long. And then the following April, that will be here. Then in April, George Robb will be presenting a program as part of the 100th anniversary of World War I on Newark and World War I, related to an exhibit that he's putting together at the library. That event will be at the library. I will be sending out notices on these, so if you are not on our list, please catch me afterwards and give me your email so that you will be sure to get notices of these programs. Tonight, we've asked Mark Krasovic to moderate a panel which he will describe. Mark, as you know, is the interim director of the Clement Price Institute at Rutgers-Newark, the author of a recently published book by the University of Chicago. And Mark, we need to figure out when we're going to host your book signing event. It will be, we'll let folks know about that. But University of Chicago Press, a study of the Great Society in Newark. Mark, thank you for taking the lead in moderating this panel, and I'm going to ask you to introduce the panelists. Good. Mark?
Good evening. So tonight we're here to look at the process of community building in recent Newark history across three racial or ethnic or national or linguistic or geographical communities. And I could add more adjectives to that list, I'm sure. But the point is to emphasize the many ways in which communities are formed and the many peoples and institutions and narratives that give them shape. And though we often give them a sort of shorthand, often labeling them by race or nation, we don't want to essentialize any community as one thing, as a monolith of any sort. We want to emphasize rather that even something we identify as a single, in some way, community still contains multitudes. And we want to explore a community as a living, historical thing that changes and develops over time, and that far from being simply exclusive or reclusive, expands and contracts and changes shape and overlaps with other, perhaps differently defined communities. So in sum, if we all come away from tonight's discussion not totally jettisoning the idea of community, but with a more complicated appreciation for how they are formed and how dynamic they are, then it will have been a good night as far as I'm concerned. And I say all of this because I recently had the great pleasure of sitting down for lunch with tonight's panelists and hearing them tell stories about themselves, about their families, about various migrations to Newark, the tribulations and triumphs of settling here, and maybe most interestingly, the way that they compared notes on their experiences. I couldn't help but come away with this, seemingly paradoxical impression that the idea of community, as complicated and messy and imprecise as it might be, holds great meaning and power for us. So the panelists tonight are wonderful scholars and chroniclers of community in Newark, and it is with great pleasure that I introduce them to you. So first off, and this is the order we'll go in, is Linda Caldwell Epps, who she just told me last week celebrated her 40th anniversary of living in Newark. Yeah, sure. She's a native New Jerseyan, a career-long educator, and under the rubric of 1804 consulting, has most recently been consulting for libraries, historical societies, and other such institutions. Next we'll have Luis Pires, a journalist, author, TV anchor, and news editor of the Luso Americano here in Newark. And third we'll have Mr. William Sanchez, the executive producer of Latino Imágenes. Is that all right? The longest-running Latino affairs television show on PBS. It's been running for 45 years, has won 4 Emmys, I believe 20 nominations. So we have an incredibly distinguished, accomplished panel with us today. And I know you'll enjoy hearing from them as much as I did at the lunch we shared. So here's how we'll work tonight. Each of the panelists will present for about 10 minutes or so, and then we'll simply open it up for questions and discussions from you, sort of lightly moderated from me. And And so to get started, please welcome Dr. Linda Caldwell Epps.
Down steps, but I made it. Good evening, everyone. Lots of friends out there. Glad you came. Good to see you. Oh, okay. Always shorter than everyone else, too. That's the other. And getting shorter as the years go by. Okay. So I'm going to, now I just lost my page. I'm going to try and keep to the 5 to 7 minutes that we were told. And that's going to be easy if I can't find my notes again. Oh, that's not it. Well, I'll talk as I look. Maybe I'll talk as I look. You practice, everything goes right, you have the iPad set exactly on the right page, and then you lose it. Okay. A little over a year ago, I was stuck in the parking lot at the Walgreens on Ferry Street. Most of you probably know where that is. It was about 6 o'clock. I couldn't get out of the parking lot. I could barely get to my car because there were all these cars stuck in the lot with irate people wondering what in the heck was going on. I became one of those people. As irate as everyone else. And then I stopped for a moment and, as my husband says, breathe, which I did. And then I realized that I'm the one who's made the decision to live in the city for 40 years. And when you live in a city for 40 years, traffic is what you get. So I decided to get out and try and see what horrible accident was holding everything up, only to see, coming towards me, those blue and red and white police lights flashing all over the place, and I could hear all this faint chanting. And as the chanting got louder, and the signs and placards that people were carrying came to the point where I could read them, I realized that it was a protest march by students from Seton Hall and Rutgers and Essex County College and NJIT. So my anger, now I'm smiling because I'm really, really happy to see this intergenerational, interracial group of students protesting over what? The recent killings that had happened. Remember, this was about a year ago. So, they were carrying Black Lives Matters signs. And at that point, I got back into my car and rolled the window down so I could listen to what they were saying and I could watch, but perfectly comfortable now, the nerves no longer jittery, and started reflecting about how wonderful a sight this was. It didn't matter that I was going to be late to where I was going, but I was really, really happy to see this. Happy to see the protesting, yes, but more happy to see the collegiality among all these different groups of people. That was really the best for me. And as Mark told you, I moved to Newark 40 years ago. I've basically lived in the same house for 37 of those 40 years. Some of my neighbors are here. They've been there that long too. And never would I have believed 40 years ago that I would see a large group of interracial people in Newark at almost dark, walking the streets. When I first came, I would see whites hurriedly running from one building to the next or to the parking lot, and never after 5 or 6, because you didn't see anyone downtown at all after 5 or 6. And it reminded me of how far we have come in these past few years. I even remember speaking with a woman who worked in the Gateway complex, and she was actually bragging about how she had worked in Newark for 15 years, but her feet had never stepped on a Newark sidewalk. True, and she was very happy about this. These were her bragging rights about this. Okay, so that's what people thought of the city. So the problem of the 20th century is the problem of the color lines, so wrote Du Bois in 1903 in The Souls of Black Folk. And he says that it's now thought of as a Southern problem, but with migration starting, it's going to become a national problem. And he was exactly right, and that's part of what happened to Newark. And most of you in this audience have read Isabel Wilkerson, so you know all about the migration and what happened. And Newark was right in the thick of this. Many people came to Newark to escape the sharecropping, the Jim Crow conditions that were in the South. And they saw places like this, a large industrial center, and especially close to New York City and between New York City and Philadelphia, as a place to go to find their promised land, to find their Zion. However, let me take liberty and read this quote that was written by Frederick Hoffman, who worked for Newark's Prudential Insurance Company. He was a statistician for Prudential, and he wrote at the beginning of the 20th century, "The Southern black man at the time of emancipation was healthy in body and cheerful in mind." At the end of emancipation. Okay? He neither suffered inordinately from disease nor from impaired bodily vigor. I don't know how. His industrial capacity as a laborer were not of a low order, nor was the condition of servitude such as to produce in him morbid conditions favorable to mental disease, suicide, or intemperance. In other words, they were happy. What are the conditions some 50 years later? This is still quoting from him. "The pages of this work of his study, that is, give me but one answer. An answer which is a most severe condemnation of modern attempts of superior races, you white people, to lift inferior races to their own elevated position." In other words, he should have left us as slaves. "An answer so full of meaning that it would seem criminal indifference on the part of a civilized people to ignore it. In the plain language of facts brought together, the colored race is shown to be on the downward grade, tending toward a condition in which matters will be worse than they are now, when diseases will be more destructive, vital resistance still lower, when the number of births will fall below deaths, and the gradual extinction of the race will take place." But we're still here. The assessment of this character of African Americans, of course, was not limited to this statistician. His report would not have been accepted. But even the NAACP wrote in 1923, "New Jersey seems lately to have changed the phrase, 'look for the criminal,' to 'look for the Negro.' Several beatings, church burnings, and Jim Crow policies in the state made it clear that the color line was to be preserved, and extra-legal police practices and violence against blacks were a potential means to that end." So when the migrants arrived from the South, it did not look like a promised land, and they were not treated like it was a promised land. Nevertheless, they made lives. They made themselves a life, and they made successful lives of their journey, especially with the opportunities that were open to them in those early days of their coming to Newark. Although they met with substandard housing, some poor health conditions, after the war's end, after the end of World War II, a little bit more difficulty in finding work. For most, it was still better than the life they had in the Jim Crow South. I have a chart. Well, okay, I hold the clicker, right? So I'm supposed to do this. Okay, and you probably can't see the numbers, as I realized I couldn't. But it shows a growth pattern of the change in population. I believe the first one starts in 1870, and the total population of Newark at that time was 105,059 people. The number of blacks that lived here was 1,789. And it goes up to 1940, where the total population of the city was 429,760. Population of 45,760 blacks. But that's a population shift from 1% to 10% in those 50 years. Quite a difference. The second chart shows the degree to which, as African Americans moved into the city, whites were vacating the city. And again, it's small. But in 1920, Newark had a total population of 414,000. 397,000 of them were white. 363,000 were, I read it wrong. 397,000 of them were white, and 17,000 were non-white, including blacks and Latinos. And it goes up to 1960, where the white population was 266,000, and the Latino and black population reached 138,000. That's a difference from 4.3 in 1920 to 34.1 in 1960. Again, quite a jump and quite a change in population. Sociologist Max Herman, who I thought would maybe be here tonight and he would enjoy hearing himself quoted, but he's not. Don't tell him. Rioting is most likely to occur when there is a strong sense of cultural difference among newcomers and natives. Given the presence of rapid demographic change, which I just told you about, conflict is particularly acute when ethnic and racial groups establish claims to territory on the basis of cultural difference and are later challenged by the arrival of new groups. Remember that as the talk goes on, right? We can be very tribal when we want to be, or at least we could be very tribal when we wanted to be. I'll talk about a change a little bit later. As living conditions became even more trouble and jobs, we all know about jobs leaving the Northeast, either going to the South or going to different countries. And as all that happened and the overcrowded happened and people became poorer instead of richer, what was thought to be the promised land for many turned into a nightmare. And hence we had what happened in 1967, which was a rising up or a rebellion of brown and black people in the city of Newark. And for years, well, I guess we still are under that stigma of what happened in 1967. Newark was, someone just told me who moved here, why would you go to that place? We have a new minister at our church who everyone warned him about coming to Newark. It's nothing but a wasteland. And he was very happily surprised when he did get here, because we've taken him by the hand and said, we're glad you came because all of those people are wrong. Through the years, especially during the past 50 years since 1967, we've stabilized. I live in a very integrated community. It's integrated financially, racially, and ethnically. And we are not the only community in the city that is that way, right, James Street people? And we have learned to come out of that tribalism and to accept our differences where there are differences. And we have formed and become neighbors more because of what we share. And we've learned to like each other above differences. And if we don't like each other, we know that it's not necessarily because of race or because of class. We're just not crazy about that particular person. And I think that that's one thing that has come out of 1967. It was a terrible time, but with that we've come out stronger. Those people who weathered the storm whites and blacks, have been able to fashion communities where there is collegiality. And many of those blacks or African Americans who came to the North from the South in order to find success were indeed successful. My church yesterday celebrated its 145th birthday. It's one of those churches that was formed by those migrants who came from North Carolina and South Carolina and Georgia and all of those places. The bottom picture, you will see members of that church in the 1950s. That's Reverend Hayes, the whitest looking guy in the picture, who's African American. And he's with Marian Anderson, the famous contralto Marian Anderson. So these people found some success. Reverend Hayes actually was a very esteemed man, held in high esteem by other Norkers. The church has had 13 pastors. He was about the 11th or 12th or something like that. And one of the best indicators of his influence is that he became a commissioner on the Newark Housing Authority, something that never would have happened to him in the backwoods of Louisiana, where someone told me he once lived. So esteemed that one of our housing projects was in his name. Hayes Homes was named after Dr. Hayes. You'll also see a picture of a woman in a cap and gown, and that's my good friend Mary Cosby, who came from Somerton County, South Carolina. Parents were sharecroppers. Came a few days after graduating from high school because she knew the only work or the only opportunity waiting for her in South Carolina was working on her father's farm or doing domestic work for $2 or $3 a week. So after high school, she came. She immediately was employed by Claramas Hospital, making more money than she had ever imagined, which was something like $20 a week. Quickly rose to become a labor leader. She helped unionize the hospital workers at Claramas and then became a union leader for all hospital workers in Newark. Went to Essex County College. Went to Bloomfield College, graduated with her degree in sociology, and has done wonderful work with just thousands and thousands of people. And certainly her talents would have been lost in South Carolina, but Newark gave her opportunity, and she took advantage of it. The other picture is of another group, because I was going to talk a lot about churches and their impact on African American communities, because that was really their outlet, but I know I don't have time, so I'm going to keep going. I've very publicly learned that the faith in Newark's ability to renew is still questioned by many New Jerseyans. I'm not one of them. And I'll end with another story. I began with one that happened just about a year ago, and I'll end with one that happened this past Saturday night. Around 9 p.m., I had the occasion to drive through downtown, once again stuck in traffic, this time because of the hockey game and the arts crawl. All right? But who would imagine that people would be coming to Newark for a hockey game or an arts crawl 15, 20 years ago? Downtown restaurants were open. There were stores that were open on Broad Market. And I happened to catch that light right there in Broad Market, and people were 3 and 4 and 5 deep waiting to cross the street. There were crowds out there. And although I cannot equate those crowds with what one might see in Times Square, the car traffic, again, was bumper to bumper. The foot traffic, again, was crowded. And once again, it was multi-generational, it was multiracial, and it was multi-ethnic. What is different about this influx of people to the city is that they're no longer running, hurrying to get inside. They're walking freely and smiling, no longer afraid or looking over their shoulder. I was one of them. In the early days, I taught at night at Rutgers-Newark. Again, James Street, people remember when there were no traffic lights on University Avenue between Central Avenue and Orange Street, and I ran looking over my shoulder. We no longer have to do that. There's still ethnically and racially based neighborhoods. They're not all integrated. But those neighborhoods that have come about because of what happened in 1967 are racially and ethnically diverse. We are, I think, finally attempting to understand each other. Not on just Anglo terms. We're not just assimilating, because that's no longer required to thoroughly assimilate. But again, we are accepting people for who and what they are. Jim Crow, I think, is really doing, at least here, a slow death. And I know that, again, publicly, Newark's ability to renew itself is questioned by many. I wrote a blog a few years ago in the Star Ledger and got blasted for calling for unity. So I know that and we have our election that's going on. Anyway, so I know that there's still difficulty. But my point is that our communities are melding, are getting along better, because we are trying to work this out and to understand each other. We're not there yet, but at least we're trying and we're open to change. And I'll stop there because I know that's more than 5 minutes. Thank you. So I should come down and stay up here.
Thank you, Linda. Now I'd like to, oh, please. Now I'd like to welcome to the podium Mr. Luis Pires, please.
Good evening, everyone. Linda, I didn't bring my iPad. I stick myself with the paper. I'm a journalist, and this is my working. My name is Luis Pires. As you know, I'm a news editor for Luso Americano. I've been a journalist for the past 50 years. I came from Portugal in 1978, and have lived in Newark since 1986. I have a very strong accent. So my second language was French, after was Spanish, some Italian, so I don't know really. Many times it's difficult to express myself in English, but I'm going to do it. I went all over the world in 7 different wars as a journalist for the Portuguese national television. I got shot twice. And let me tell you that I know a lot of Portuguese around the world, in the military, in Kuwait in 1991, in different wars in South America, Sandinistas. Always found a Portuguese guy, a Portuguese military, special forces, army, air force, and a few of them, they were from New Jersey. I covered a lot of stories all over the United States, and I know all the communities in the almost 50 states, and always found a Portuguese person. And the majority of them, they passed through Newark. So Newark was a very important place for all those people around the world that I met. I know the community very well. I've interviewed hundreds of Portuguese on different occasions, and I came to the conclusion that the Portuguese have completely transformed the eastward in Newark, and they have contributed immensely to all aspects of life of the city and at state level. The Portuguese have increased their immigration adventure since the end of the 19th century. In the early days of the Portuguese immigration to this city, they found many challenges, and many of them went to work for the beer brewers, the Benjamin Moore Company, and other big companies at the time. And why did the Portuguese come to Newark? Newark was close to the arrival ports of New York, Bayonne, and Philadelphia. My grandfather came in 1927. He passed through the recession, and he was deported in 1930. 50 years after my parents came to the United States, and I came after. These immigrants did not have much money to support themselves for a long period of time without work. They had to grab a job to live. We, the Portuguese immigrants, found the Newark Germans, Lithuanians, Poles, Italians, and other groups of residents in the Ironbound, and that made us very comfortable because we could understand each other. Others left and we stayed. We changed life in this world. We have created a new generation of immigrants and we have worked very hard. Today, the East Ward can be considered the Portuguese quarter of New Jersey with the help of the new Brazilian community and later with the Ecuadorian community that is now growing a lot in this world. In the 20s and 30s, many of the new Portuguese immigrants went to live in New England. At the time, the Portuguese in Massachusetts and Rhode Island were already a very large and a very strong community with more job opportunities in a very difficult time with the American economy. The Great Recession was bad for the Portuguese. Many went back to Portugal, but others stayed. In 1928, the newspaper that I represent was created by Mr. Vasco Jardim, who kept it until 1979. In that year, his daughter and son and his son and sister-in-law took over the newspaper that is read in the Portuguese communities throughout the United States. 38,000 issues on Wednesday, 36,000 on Fridays. The newspaper is published twice a week on Wednesdays and Fridays since 1979 and is in the hands of Mr. Matinho. We have documented in paper and digitally the growth of the Portuguese community throughout the decades, and today we have a Portuguese-American councilman, as you know, Augie Amador. We have a Portuguese-American sheriff, Armando Fontoura, a legislator, Eliana Pintor, and we have a lot of police officers, firemen, lawyers, engineers, teachers, doctors, Portuguese associations, clubs, restaurants, and many ethnic businesses. The Portuguese community has changed their life in the life of the others since their coming to the Ironbound. The Portuguese Sports Club in Newark was born in 1921, and it has been a local point of practically all the activities of the community. In that club on Congress Street, the Sunday dancing shows, were the best in town. Javier Cugat Orchestra, Eddie Fisher, and the Bloomfield Mandolin Orchestra performed there, among others. The Ironbound on Ferry Street was a place to see and to be seen, with many other activities that were taking root in the community, with new businesses such as coffee shops and bakeries, restaurants, grocery stores, among others, which started flourishing in the section of the city at that time. The Portuguese church came in 1956 by initiative of Father Capote, and soon became the reunion meeting place for the Portuguese in the Ironbound. About 3 years ago, Mr. Bernardino Coutinho and other members of the community initiated the Portuguese National Day celebration with feasts and parades on Ferry Street, and today our city continues to be seen and spoken about everywhere in the United States and overseas. The celebration of the Portuguese Day here in the Ironbound has been a tremendous show of dedication to our values of being our heritage and our pride of being Portuguese Americans. Thank you very much.
And now Mr. William Sanchez, who befitting somebody who has worked in television for so long, I believe has some video to show us. Right? Wonderful. Yeah.
How about that? Try now.
Yeah, I'm working. Okay, can you hear me now? Yeah.
Yeah.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
My father, his name was Artemio Maragua Quiñones, became a very good friend of Mr. Congressman Peter Rodino. And Rodino actually walked him through the steps of City Hall and informed him what he had to do for the community. My father was abandoned as a child because his mother passed away in Puerto Rico, so he grew up basically an orphan, and his grandmother took care of him for a little bit. But I want to pass this along, and I want you to tell me, as you look at it, does that look like it's Puerto Rico or somewhere in the South? That's my family. And when we arrived, this is what Bleecker Street used to look like. I'll pass this along. And originally that was Jewish owned. A lot of Jews lived there, Polish, Irish. And I went to St. Patrick's School. But before I get that, this is my father. When he ran for office, he became a district leader. He couldn't read or write, but he became district leader. And I'm going to tell you the population of Newark when we got here, okay? 1950, 545 Puerto Ricans. And they all lived on Bleecker Street. Now they actually lived on Burnett Street, James Street, University Avenue, which used to be Plain Street, and down to New Street. And then in the 1960s, that expanded from 5,640 to 55,351. Okay, that was my father on the phone calling everybody from Puerto Rico, come over. What he didn't tell them is that his favorite store in Newark, department store, was Goodwill. And so when I showed up with my mother from Puerto Rico, he never told us that it was cold. So I'm 5 years old, my mother brings me with shorts right out of the airport, and then he says, oh, I got it. He took us to Goodwill. And the first thing that he bought me was a pair of Buster Brown shoes and long pants. And I didn't know what, Buster Brown, how many of you remember Buster Brown? Oh, good. Oh, good. I try to talk to people about that. They don't, Buster Brown, who is that? No, it wasn't Nike but for us in those days, Goodwill was the place to go. And I still go there. And I still contribute because they actually took care of my family when we were in need of clothing. So what happened was that he, when he came here, he couldn't speak English, couldn't find a job, and he ended up working in a restaurant for a little bit, washing dishes. And he learned how to order something besides soup. Because every time he went to a restaurant, he couldn't read the menu, he couldn't say, all he had to, every day he was eating soup. So finally, he learned to the restaurant, how it works, and he brought my mother in, and she learned the restaurant business. Unfortunately, it was an Irish restaurant, and it closed not too long after. So the beauty of this all is that we learned about Newark because my father was originally one of the farm workers in a place called Matawan. So when you came from Puerto Rico here, you automatically were given the name of the town you came from. So my father's original name was Artemio, and everybody called him Matawan because that's where he came from. So Santurce and all these people who came from other towns in Puerto Rico got those names. So it was interesting because one of my cousins his name was Honey. That's his real name, Honey. And he didn't know how to pronounce Newark, and he kept saying Nua, and that means naked in Spanish. And so he kept telling the cab driver from the airport to take him to Nua, and the guy couldn't figure out what he was saying. And my father had to tell him, look, what you're saying is naked. That's why he couldn't find the place. So, and also he also told him that in the United States he couldn't call him Honey because it meant something else. So my family was, because my father was white and my mother was black in terms of the culture, he was able to get into places where my mother was not. And so one of the Ironbound section, my mother loved it. And one of the things I need to tell you is the Puerto Ricans during for a long time were called Spaniards because it was a Spanish territory. And they even fought in the Civil War under the name Spaniards. And they also fought for both sides, by the way. And so there's a lot of Puerto Ricans who became heroes. And I'm going to pass this along so you guys to look at. In all the wars of the United States, they have been there. But the Ironbound section was, because of the Spaniards and the Portuguese and what they did there, because the Ballantine Company was there, it drew a lot of people from the Caribbean. So my mother would go from Bleecker Street to the Ironbound to shop. She didn't know, she couldn't speak a word English, but as soon as she hit that Ironbound section, she was speaking and very happy. And Mulberry Street. Mulberry Street was a very key place in Newark, not only for us, because my mother understood everything. She became a very good cook, and she understood everything that they were saying in English, because she knew what the product was. Now, what I want to ask you all in the first tape I'm going to play here is, what do you think was the what was the name of this area? Okay, I'm going to play it and listen to this.
Much of the charting of the Mid-Atlantic states area is due in great part to Hispanics, to Spaniards in particular, who had come from Puerto Rico and Havana. In fact, in the early 1500s, 1512 to be exact, this whole area was known as the land of Esteban Gomez, who 84 years prior to Jamestown had already charted a town called San Miguel, which later became Jamestown. Much of that surveying work was done by Esteban Gomez and his 600 families who came to this area. It's one of those pages missing from our history books. The question of the names of places, etc., those links began with the Spanish. In fact, the Hudson River today is known as the Hudson River, I suspect, because the American history books say so. But back in the days when the history was being written by the Spanish, it was originally called El Río de San Antonio.
The people in Spain came to the New World. It was already there. It wasn't discovered. It was something that was there.
I've done a lot of specials on the city of Newark. And we've covered, I mean, God bless you, man, and your Portuguese and the Spanish, because you did something. It was run down. And in 1914, they went and changed the culture, the look. And even years later today, we're still talking about the Ironbound section. So for Puerto Ricans, my father, who because he was white, they always called him Spanish, and says, oh yeah, and down neck. Because he knew that it was very positive feeling. And one of the things that had happened that I need you to understand is not everything went easy for the Puerto Ricans in Newark. By the way, I did go to St. Patrick's School. I was an honorary Irish person. And I did march in the parades with all the other Puerto Ricans who were in the class, and we all wore our green hat. And I'm telling you, I'm proud, man, because I had never been in a parade, and here I am, you know. And people were cheering, and I learned all the songs. So St. Patrick's School. And I went home, my mother said, what's that? And I say, I'm Irish today. And what I want to do is I want to play you because not everything went that easy. The hardest and most difficult part of our lives happened we had been in Newark for about 10 years. The whole block, I'm telling you, knew my father. And he would go into the court systems and get any Latino that was, because there was a problem. And I come from a Caribbean island. And we play dominoes outside. There's nothing goes on inside. We play dominoes outside, we go outside, we recreate, we play music outside. And there was a loitering law in Newark. Anybody caught 3 or more together would get arrested. So my father was constantly going to the courts, and that's why Rodino got involved and helped us out, because they kept getting arrested. And not only that, but they would sometimes some would get even up to 30 days for loitering. And so that was an issue. But the biggest issue happened when all of a sudden there was no more Bleecker Street. And I'll play this down for you to see. And this is my father, who was the district leader and the last person to leave Bleecker Street because he protested. He said the whole community, my family was divided all over the city in different projects, Hayes Homes, Baxter Terrace, and we ended up on 7th Avenue.
Grammar school, but a lot was developed around the church in those days, and so it became kind of our social center. But there was a mass exodus, like right after the Second World War, and the housing was kind of old at that time, and a lot of it wasn't fixed up during the Depression and the war years that followed. And so people looked for something new, and they could buy a home with no down payment under the GI Bill. So we saw that old neighborhood start to break up.
Es durante este tiempo, cuando la ciudad perdía su vitalidad como centro industrial, que los negros del sur de Estados Unidos y los puertorriqueños llegan a Newark por miles. Vienen a recoger los despojos del pasado glorioso de la ciudad. Las condiciones económicas del sur de la nación y de Puerto Rico eran aún peores. En Puerto Rico, la depresión tuvo efectos desastrosos. Con ella se combinó el colapso de la industria azucarera, que era la mayor del país. Cientos de miles de trabajadores agrícolas se quedaron sin medios de vida. Para ellos, la migración era la única esperanza y la transportación aérea lo facilitaba. Durante la década del 50, más de 40.000 puertorriqueños emigraron anualmente a Estados Unidos, formando comunidades en las grandes ciudades industriales del este, así como también a los campos, como trabajadores agrícolas. Muchos de ellos, eventualmente, se establecerían en las ciudades.
Alegre, el jibarito va pensando así, diciendo así, cantando así.
Los nuevos emigrantes se encontraron con condiciones muy diferentes a las que tuvieron grupos anteriores. La variedad de trabajos y oportunidades que tuvieron otros comenzaba a desaparecer. Los puertorriqueños fueron formando su comunidad entre las calles Bleecker, Plain y James, en lo que es hoy el campus de la Universidad de Rutgers en Newark. La mayor parte de ellos eran trabajadores no diestros y semidiestros que trabajaban en oficios de servicio, mantenimiento y en algunos trabajos de fábricas. Aquella comunidad era como un oasis en un desierto de adversidades.
Aquí fue que yo vine a vivir en el 1953, y este barrio era un barrio el barrio latino, que le decían Plain Street. Aquí fueron muchos de los que dijeron que cuando tumbaran este barrio se iban para Puerto Rico y no lo veían más, y así lo hicieron. Muchos, cuando vieron que tumbaron las primeras casas, se fueron para Puerto Rico y no han vuelto. Aquí se moría uno y se le hacía el mejor entierro entre todos. Aquí se enfermaba cualquiera. Aquí le traían se le daba la compra toda la semana. Aquí era un barrio que era todo humilde, todos nos llevaban muy bien.
They banded together in that one area, which I knew so well, because there were low rents, and they, once again, they like so many other ethnic Catholic communities before them, they looked to bond themselves to the parish church, and fortunately we saw the need, and there were Spanish-speaking priests available to serve the needs of the people. And so our school became predominantly Puerto Rican at the time, and we brought the traditional societies, the Sacred Heart Society, which was popular in Puerto Rico for women, and the Daughters of Mary, and the Holy Name Society. And so people began to develop a sense of unity around the church, as well as they began to develop the small social clubs, and there was a sense of strength growing because they were bonded together in about a 12, 13 block area. And out of that, they were beginning to help each other find better jobs, and there was a great deal of communication which goes on when you have a close-knit community.
A diferencia de los negros, los puertorriqueños se enfrentaban además a una cultura e idioma diferentes y a la nueva experiencia de ser minoría, y más aún, discriminados racialmente. Los puertorriqueños eran rechazados por todos, o porque no eran blancos, o porque no eran negros. Por eso, se concentraron en sí mismos. Los choques con las autoridades y otros grupos étnicos no tardaron en producirse.
Muchos de los viejos líderes llaman esa la época cero de los puertorriqueños en la ciudad de Newark. Porque de hecho te voy a decir que una de las protestas que fuimos a dar nosotros en el nombre del Puerto Rican Political Association fue del atropello que teníamos nosotros con la policía, ¿verdad? Y la policía no nos podía ver en ninguna esquina. Si habíamos tres reunidos en una esquina ahí, o nos íbamos o nos maceteaban. De hecho, nos prohibieron a los puertorriqueños a esa época entrar a un parquecito que está en el sur de Bronx, se llama Lincoln Park. Y protestamos contra el alcalde igual que nada, ¿no? Y de ahí fue que nosotros llamamos esa la época cero de los puertorriqueños.
I just want you to imagine that an entire community in Bleecker Street was told that you can't go to Lincoln Park. They could not go or they would be arrested. That community was then banded to Columbus Homes Projects, which this is an entire show. And by the way, I did this, when we did this, we also did the Latinizations on New Jersey, and it was the first show that I went in competition to St. Louis at a national level, and we beat Peter Jennings and ABC News Tonight. I wanna also show you, this is my mother. Standing in front of the house she said one day would be hers. And if you look closely, is the one that is now named after one of my favorite people, Professor Clement Price. And we, every time somebody comes from Puerto Rico, we take a picture in front of it. No, it's Bleecker Street, 49 Bleecker Street. That's your building. Thank you.
Oh, I don't need to go to the podium anymore.
Yeah. And I want to thank the people from NJPAC. We've been here 20 years. I have something called the Hispanic Youth Showcase with Dora the Explorer and a whole bunch of other people. But the NJPAC staff saved me this afternoon. Otherwise, they would not see this tape. So thank you.
Sure.
I think I'm having the same feeling that I had after lunch that day, where I feel like I will now look at the city with very different eyes than I had before meeting these folks. And literally, if that camera in that second video had panned just another 20 feet, you would have seen 49 Bleecker Street where my office is right now. So can't wait to see that photo. So rather than me sort of lead off questions, in the time we have left, I figured I would just open it to all of you for questions, reflections, if you can keep it short. And yeah, I think we could probably all hear you guys where you are. So Linda, do you want to get us? I'm sorry. So if you wouldn't mind coming up to the mic with any questions.
Thank you all for those excellent presentations. I learned a lot myself, and the last presentation begs the question of what happened that Rutgers, it sounds like Rutgers came in on Bleecker Street to maybe use eminent domain or whatever, and I would love to know the actual circumstances for that and what, if any, protest there was by those who were displaced.
My father tried to get the neighborhood because most of that, honestly, was my family. You know, they came from a place in Puerto Rico called Macau. And we, all the way from Washington to what was then High Street, is now Martin Luther King Boulevard, that was my family. So we tried to stop it. Obviously, we weren't told until it was going to happen. And my father's district leader was offended, and so he told them, stay in your homes, lock it down, don't leave. And we were the last ones out of there. When they started coming with the knocking things down, we had no choice. And the sad part is that we left and moved to North Newark with Columbus Homes, which is actually the first ward of Newark, an Italian ward, which was an Italian community who was originally promised that they would get the housing that is there now. Those little houses, they had been promised those little houses, and instead they built these monsters, 12 floors, and the Italian community said that's not what we were told. And unfortunately, they started leaving, and more and more and more, until 1967 when the riots started, and then the whole place was abandoned. There was no cleanup. It was horrible growing up. 1967, when the riots in Newark took place, it took place actually on 7th Avenue in Springfield Avenue first, and then 7th Avenue. But we never knew. We just handed over vacate.
I didn't want you to stop talking, but the man motioned me, so I came up. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yeah.
I'm glad to know that. I wanted to thank all of you, of course, but I really wanted to say to you, I live in the same neighborhood that you're describing, but I live in the West Ward. What ward are you guys in?
We're in the Central Ward.
You're in the Central Ward? Okay, nice. I just wanted to thank you and say that I understood, because we have the same thing. We're like every country you can imagine, and we're all really, really close, except that one people that we all don't relate to. Yeah. Thank you very much. I loved your lecture.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks to the presenters as well. My question is about the stigmatization of New York, the continued stigmatization of New York. Because I live in Brooklyn, and some people I interact with still kind of have this perception of New York as a place you don't go to. Obviously, that's not correct, because there are people who come. I have a friend who goes to school in the city, so and he has some good things to say. But how do you deal with that continued stigmatization? What efforts are afoot? And maybe why does it still persist? Thanks.
To any one of us, or did you direct it to one person?
Anybody.
Oh. Should I go first? Oh. I counteract it and talk about all the good things that happen here, and I can list them. And what are you looking for when you're looking for a good place to live? That's usually the question that I ask. And when I get their answer, I counteract it with what Newark has: the ease of transportation, the walkability of the downtown area. I can't quite combat the shopping, although we're getting there. I can't talk about the shopping. The good restaurants, I can talk about. The green spaces, because we do have parks, beautiful parks here. I can always bring up examples of my neighbors and our closeness. And I don't think that's just my neighborhood. I think that happens in other neighborhoods in the city. So I just counteract the bad talk
talk about this place and the arena and other things that you can do here.
Good.
I've always seen Newark as a foundation of hope. And the reason I say that is because people who talk about Newark don't really study its history. I've done the history of jazz, and Mario Bauza, Machito, Ella Fitzgerald, and Dizzy Gillespie. And Newark, that area, Bradford Place, and the Lowe's Theater, which is down the block, the Adams. This is where the cultural essence of what the people of Newark was. And you stayed late, you stayed there, and you enjoyed the music, the culture, the exchanges that somehow now are because of the type of fear that exists. And I'm hoping that changes around because of the New Jersey Performing Arts Center, the Prudential. People begin to communicate and talk about Newark in its historical sense of accomplishments. Some of the greatest stars in music, in Latin music and jazz, performed here. And are still performing here because of NJPAC and the New Jersey Performing Arts Center. So when somebody tells me, for example, when I was on 7th Avenue, taxi cabs would not take me to 7th Avenue. All right? They would pick me up here. It says, where do you live? Columbus Homes Projects. And they said, aren't you afraid? And they told me, aren't you afraid of being mugged? And I would smile and say, why? I do the mugging. What do you think? And because it was predominantly Puerto Rican, there was a taxi driver who was actually Peruvian, who put a lot of Puerto Rican flags on his cab. He was getting all the rides to 7th Avenue. But we need to believe in the city.
He's right. Newark is a city of hope. I love Newark. I never left Newark. I live in South Street in Newark. And I think that each ward has its own culture. And north, south, west, east, whatever. For the Portuguese, we don't know what racial problems are. We are a multiracial country. We were in Mozambique, in Angola, Cape Verde for centuries. Portugal doesn't know what's that. So we go very well, and we go along with the black community very well, with no problems at all. So you have now the Brazilians, Ecuadorians, Puerto Ricans. We have Portuguese married with Puerto Rican people, and Brazilian people, and Italian people. So the secret is a word, adaptation. We adapt ourselves to the city. And I think that we are part of the city and to the future of this community.
I would just add, one of the powerful things about thinking of the city through the lens of migration, yes, whether it's from the South or from overseas, is that throughout its history, at some point, some people were thinking of it as a land of hope, as a destination, yes, it is, despite whatever stigmatization has been going on.
And I just want to add to that, Steve Arubaro in the North Ward Center, he welcomed the Puerto Ricans. Well, other Italian groups say, no, he welcomed and he says, look, everybody that comes into our neighborhood is welcome. And he made sure that he catered to all the groups, and that's what he's still preaching today. I haven't seen him for years, but that's what my father was always doing in his office. But if we don't talk to each other like you're doing now, or something like this, then obviously fear becomes the winner.
Need to fight.
Sir?
Linda, my neighbor, you and I have mentioned over the years our experiences where people come to the James Street Commons and they say something to the effect, oh, I had no idea there was such a beautiful neighborhood in Newark. Mm-hmm. Would you say that a neighborhood such as ours, which is historic, but also ethnically and socioeconomically mixed. Kind of shows the way for the future, and maybe we had a little bit to do with opening the door for others to see the opportunity in Newark, and maybe we could take a little credit for what's happening now.
I think we can probably take a lot of credit for what's happening now. Bill, by the way, I have a young son who, when he first was able to take the bus home on his own and stay no more after school programs, I think he would lose his key on purpose so that he could knock on Bill's door, and Bill would feed him cookies and do his homework for him and do all sorts of things with him. Mostly television, okay. It's not that we've been perfect. Through the 35, 40 years, we've had our ups and downs. But we've had a core group of people there who were unwilling to abandon where we live. So we have fought for that neighborhood. We haven't won every battle, but I think we've won more than we've lost. And quite frankly, people like Bill and the next person who's coming up, they have worn our city officials down. And we've just had a tenacity about us. And because of that, we've become an example of what can be. And I think other neighborhood groups in the city have looked at us and said, this is what's possible. It's possible to stay in this city and have a decent quality of life. I've heard on more than one occasion that James Street is an oasis. Well, maybe it was once upon a time, but it's certainly not that now. Because what has happened there and what has happened in the Ironbound is expanding throughout the city, perhaps not fast enough. We'd like it to be like that. It's not going to happen like that. It's been a long struggle. I was riding today and thinking of some of our neighbors who were pioneers who are no longer with us, and what smiles they would have if they could see what is there now. So I think you're right. I think in some ways we've served as an example. I don't want to leave out the cooperation of Rutgers and the other schools that have been not always a support, but when they realized our worth, have been a support through the years as well. A city is as good as its people. That's what makes cities successful. And I happen to think, like you, that there are some good people who have been attracted to this city, and more of them who are being attracted to this city, and who have hopes for a good life. And know that a good life does not exactly have to be a well-manicured lawn on a house with 2 acres. It doesn't have to mean that. And I think that that's what we've proven.
My question is to Mr. Pires. Why do you think that the Portuguese have not expanded their business and residential base out of the East Ward to other wards of Newark, yet at the same time they've expanded their business and residential base to other parts of New Jersey?
The Ironbound is like a ghetto for the Portuguese. They didn't know how to speak English when they came, the same. I met and I interviewed people 5 years ago, 4 years ago, and they asked me, "You went to New York already?" No, I never went to New York. I live here for 25 years. See, why? I don't need to go to New York. I have Ferry Street, my doctor, my pharmacy, my grocery store. They get used to the words. They have everything in Portuguese or Spanish. That's what they understand. And for you to see the difference between the Portuguese and the Spanish, or the Spanish language, we have a word for empanada. We call empada. It's like a small, meat cake that call empanada in Spanish. Mm-hmm. The Portuguese word is empada. But now everybody, all the Portuguese say empanada, because we got used to it. It's a Spanish word, so in Portuguese or Spanish, we understand each other. So they never left. They went to North Newark, right? A few of them went to North Newark. A few of them with more economical possibilities. They went to Warren, to Summit, to Milburn, but just 10% of them. So majority lives in Ironbound because they like to stay there and to deal with people that they deal in their own land in Portugal, around the corner. They can walk, they can speak, they can understand each other. That's it. And they support themselves that way.
That's perfect. We have time for one more.
Talking about North Newark, no question, I just want to tell you something. My ancestors started a synagogue in North Newark on Broadway. We're still there. Tonight's a Jewish holiday. It's called Simchat Torah. They roll up the Torah. They're going to be dancing in the street with the Torahs. We go on the middle of Broadway, and that's tonight.
Thank you.
Good.
I know that Mark said
One more comment.
No more questions. But I would just like to do a public service announcement. Newark 350, again, is having a program that explores Newark's spiritual heritage at Bethany Baptist Church on the 12th of November. What time is it, Darthan? 6 o'clock? 6 o'clock. And hopefully you'll all come to that as well. I'm sorry, it is the 9th. I was right the first time. The 9th.
I have a note to say, just to finish, right?
Please, yes.
I would like just to put this to the consideration of the New Jersey Historical Society. There was a man that passed through Newark on his way to San Francisco, was a Portuguese consul. He went to France in 1938. His name is Aristides de Sousa Mendes. I call him the Angel of Bordeaux. I wrote that book. And he saved more than 30,000 Jews from the Holocaust. He came to Newark, he was in Newark, and he went to San Francisco as a consul before that happened. Would like to do something about Aristides Mendes in the near future, just for the people to know what a good man is.
Thank you. William, do you have last thoughts?
Yeah, no, we were just talking about that at the lunch, remember?
Yep.
It's a beautiful place, and I always went by and I said, "Wow!" I'm glad you brought that up. Yeah. I just want to just leave you with something. Jerry Eisenberg, you know who that was? Newark Star Ledger. I had the pleasure of working with him on a film called Newark Is My Home. And if you see the emotion that he put into the making of that, as a journalist, it's tearful. And I also want to tell you that my father passed away right after we did this. He got a heart attack. But I was able to get him to tell his story. So the important thing is tell your story, read the stories of others, because in all that mix is Newark.
Yeah, you're right.
Thank you. Would you please thank our panelists? Thank you so much. Any final announcements? Okay. Have a good evening.